Thanks everyone for joining us. We're going to do a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. I'm going to start with the learning outcomes. We're going to talk about some nuances of integrating ADA with condition assessments, statewide program best practices, integrating deferred maintenance, resiliency, and climate change adaptation, and integrating all of this into a work management system. Billy, I know you have some additional housekeeping items you wanted to cover. So let's get started. My name is Nick Jur. I'm a process leader at FOSS of Canon Design. That's Facility Optimization Solutions. On this particular engagement, I was the principal investigator, which makes me sound a little bit like Sherlock Holmes. But it was very, very interesting work. It was a great process, and we're super happy to be here today to share out what we learned conducting a statewide assessment with our partners at DCAM.
Hi, and my name is Sarah Felton. I'm a Deputy Director of Planning at DCAM, which is the acronym for the Division of Capital Asset Management and Maintenance for Massachusetts. And I oversaw sort of the process, but I'm going to turn this to our project manager.
Hi, and my name is Mila Mendoza. I am a senior program manager for higher ed, but in that specific case, I was the project manager, so day-to-day person.
So a little bit about our team, FOSS of Canon Design. We're a specialty group inside Canon. We perform condition assessments, maintenance planning, facilities planning, and we do this across the country. We've done this in 37 states and 3 provinces in Canada. We're ranked #1 in the world for FM services by an AE firm. This is our 4th year. We've done over 1 billion of these types of engagements for condition assessments and capital plans and foundational planning. And we are lucky to have great partners. So what's a little bit interesting and unique about us is that we are both professional services and software solutions. So we do condition assessments, tagging, CMMS integration, capital improvement planning, job order contracting, and total cost of ownership. And we're backed up by our software team. We have 2 solutions that we developed in-house, one of which FOSScore was used as our primary collection tool on this project. Our team was started, we grew out of the education practice at Canon Design to help our clients long term. We understand that planning and designing construction is really a small portion of the overall life cycle of a building, and that's what our team has really been developed and built, purpose-built to do, is to help support during the manage and maintenance portion of the life cycle of assets. And what we advocate for, what we think is really unique about our group, is that we're an interdisciplinary team. We're made up of architects, engineers, former contractors, cost estimators and managers, as well as software designers. So in our experience, having these multi-lenses to do this type of integrated service is so important to understand that we have multiple perspectives and that we understand what we're doing from a foundational standpoint as we mark in a consistent manner.
And I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Division of Capital Asset Management and Maintenance does for Massachusetts. We were created as an organization by the legislature in 1980 to oversee capital construction and capital maintenance and promote quality and integrity in those processes. We do everything from capital planning to facilities planning to construction, and also have real estate services that oversee leasing, that oversee disposition of property and management of property. Next slide. Similar to FOSS, DCAM is made up of a really diverse group of professionals, including construction engineers, registered architects, registered engineers, real estate professionals, legal professionals, and facilities management folks. So it also is a very diverse group of people. We oversee 61 million gross square feet of space across the Commonwealth, across, I don't know, I want to say 11 secretariats and agencies. Total, you can sort of see the makeup. Higher education makes up the largest portion of our facilities. And the state unit, we conducted this facility condition assessment that you're going to hear about today for the state universities and community colleges, which make up about half of that purple line you see at the top. So approximately 14 million gross square feet of space. Next slide. This graph we love to call our shark chart. It shows each of the secretariats where we oversee capital facilities over time, and when they were constructed, the number of gross square feet constructed over time. So the purple shark fin at the very back of this slide represents our higher education facilities. And if you sort of pull that down, and we will share this deck, you can see that most of our, a large portion of our facilities were built in the late 60s and 1970s. So all of them have reached sort of 50 years plus of time and require a fair amount of attention. Next slide. Key initiatives that DCAM is addressing are the four that you see here: energy efficiency, decarbonization, climate resiliency, and accessibility. Those are just sort of paramount to everything that we work on, whether it be a planning project, whether it be a system-wide look, whether it be an individual construction project. Next slide. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about those initiatives. The state universities and community colleges make up approximately 15% of the carbon emissions for all of those 61 million gross square feet. So they are significant in our efforts to try and address decarbonization. And in Massachusetts, that there is a legislative mandate that we minimize the environmental impacts of our state government facilities by reducing and decarbonizing state facilities by 2050. So this graph represents where we are trying to get by 2050. In addition, there is a new energy code that was effective July 1st, 2023. It focuses on the building envelope, the heating and cooling system, but fundamentally on really creating energy efficient buildings, both in major renovations and in new construction. Next slide. And as we make efforts to address all of those three goals, we are doing it through infrastructure projects, so horizontal infrastructure projects, EV charging stations, the electrical infrastructure. We're doing it in existing buildings, we're doing it in new buildings, and for the higher ed institutions in particular, because there are so many institutions that rely on central plants, we are doing campus-specific plans to develop roadmaps to get to a decarbonized campus. We're about halfway through those. We have 33 campuses, I believe, including the UMass campuses. So those are part of what we do every day. Next slide. And accessibility is also a primary initiative for the state. It's an initiative, as everyone knows, that has been in place for quite a while. We have a topic-specific sort of expertise within DCAM. We call it our Statewide Accessibility Initiative, or SAI. And we are looking to make all of our facilities as accessible as we can. And it's driven by the federal laws and regulations, the ADA, which most people are aware of, but we also have a state Massachusetts Architectural Access Board regulations which apply. Next slide. So as we went into this facility condition assessment, we were looking to identify, at the base of it all, really identify what is the current backlog of deferred maintenance. And how do we then prioritize those projects? Which ones are most critical? Which ones will address climate resiliency issues on different campuses? Which ones will address decarbonization issues on campuses? So prioritizing those items was very important. We use this data to inform capital investment decision-making on a lot of fronts, both on decision-making about larger, major capital projects, as well as decision-making on how we allocate the funding that we do have to address deferred maintenance. And the data is going to inform every one of the initiatives that I described in the last slides. So it will inform how we start to deal with energy efficiency, decarbonization, climate resiliency, and accessibility. EO 623 is a legislative mandate that we have to identify surplus property throughout the Commonwealth. So it will also serve to help us make decisions about the possibility of surplusing property. Next slide. So for this project, I think one of the most important parts for us of initiating this FCA, as we call it, even though so much more than that, we developed a very detailed RFP or request for proposals, and we had in place master service agreements with firms who had expertise in doing FCAs. We put it out to multiple firms, and I think some of the most important things as we developed this project scope and went out with the RFP for this project were that we engaged people from each of the segments, so the state universities and the community colleges, in the development of the scope, as well as in the evaluation of the proposals in the scope. So we worked hard throughout the project, and I think it was started even before the project started, to buy in on the part of our constituents. Next slide.
So
I'm going to turn it over to experienced project manager.
Thank you, Sarah. So again, for those of you that just joined a tad bit later, my name is Mila Mendoza. I'm a project manager for this specific project. We thought it's a great example of how we were able to handle and help with all these initiatives that are happening in the state of Massachusetts with our partner, FOSS. We couldn't have wished for a better partner to execute this project. It was quite the undertaking. We had to work with 24 higher ed institutions, 28 campuses, overall more than 270 buildings, and about 14 million gross square feet. So evaluating those, trying to get the most of it and understanding what we're dealing with was quite the undertaking. For that, we needed to execute the project from the beginning through the end. And some of the points that really helped us get through the project is establishing pilot projects, then going through virtual kickoffs, field work, and providing customized reports. For the pilots, we actually chose to select 2 state universities and 2 community colleges that were across the state. So we have a good sample size, and we worked with them to test the actual deliverables. We tested what the stakeholders needed and tried to determine the information and deliverables. So there was a lot of collaboration, and we had to get it right so we can continue with the process and just repeat the effort. This effort, just to keep in mind, it took about 3 to 5 months because we had to go through multiple reports and go back with and work with the constituents to get those resolved. For the pilot reports, we also involved a lot of different groups on our end, so sorry to switching too quickly. Different groups as far as the energy, the accessibility, the environmental groups within DCAM to help us resolve the efforts and the deliverables. For this effort, we had an overall project schedule, which is typical for any project, but we also had to figure out to do the site visit schedule. So we had 2 kinds of visit schedules. One was virtual, where we kind of met with the campus. FOSS was introduced to the buildings, you know, kind of got a sense of how big the campus is. And then we had to schedule an on-site visit. The on-site visit was really hard to schedule because, again, it's 24 institutions, multiple campuses. We had climate conditions in Massachusetts, winter, and we want to make sure everyone is safe. Don't climb on the roofs when it's slippery or it's raining. And we had to determine how long does it take for the team that's visiting from out of state to be on site, making sure that the people that were helping them visit all the buildings were available. So there was a lot of coordination on that end. With the coordination and the field visits, then we also had to figure out how to report, how to track all of the reports. And so we created a schedule that we not only track the pilot reports, but we track throughout the reports as far as you know, delivering the reports, getting the feedback, and then reissuing the revised draft and then a final draft. So all of these efforts, different institutions had different capacity of reviewing reports and getting back to us with comments. So there was a lot of tracking on that effort, on that end. We also tracked all of their comments. And this was a crucial piece of the puzzle because we wanted to make sure that anyone that had any comments, we've captured them and addressed them. We also wanted to make sure that we didn't miss, and we were very clear on what was addressed and how it was addressed. Sometimes we had to go back and cost estimates, change the cost estimate, change the priority, change the group. But I think on that end, I'll hand it off to Nick, and he'll get into a little bit more detail on how we got there.
Thanks so much, Mila. So I wanted to start with levels of detail. So when we set this up and responded to the RFP and worked through the pilot, we recognized that we'd be performing work and collecting data at multiple levels of detail. So we had some of the scope that required a system level look and other parts of the scope that required a component level look. Loosely, looking at this diagram, systems correspond to a uniformat level 3 assessment and components correspond to a uniformat level 5 assessment. And then of course, we want to also understand the facility as a whole. Next slide. So a visual example of what that means is that here's a uniformat level 3 systems example. So we have an emergency power. Everything in this emergency power system is grouped together. The generator, the transfer switches, the chargers, and the paralleling gear. This is all organized together, prioritized together, as well as priced together as one complete system. This is in contrast to uniformat level 5, next slide, where each individual piece is quantified and cataloged as its own standalone. This allows for strategic replacements and understanding which of these can be replaced to extend the overall life of the system. So in some cases, again, we were looking at system level information for deferred maintenance, and in other cases, we were looking at level 5 information in terms of the equipment verification scope. Next slide. A really critical aspect, especially with a project of this scale, working across the entire Commonwealth of Massachusetts, prioritization. So we prioritized with specific examples, specific business rules of what makes a priority 1, what makes a priority 2, what makes a priority 3, and what those action timeframes are. Importantly, we tested that rubric during the course of the pilot and made adjustments before rolling it out to the entire group. So this is one of our key sources of data, or in terms of how we sort information, and we'll show a little bit more about that moving forward. Next slide, please. So the way that we do this work, the way that we did this work in Massachusetts and across the country, is a 3-phase, 9-step process. We collect information, we make decisions together, and then we co-author a plan for action. Orientation included data requests. It included getting as much information as possible. And that also rolled directly into our pre-assessment. Pre-assessment in this case was the virtual kickoffs, which were very successful in getting both the on-site teams, the on-site campus teams, ready for our visits. And starting that dialogue or collecting information so that we showed up for the site survey, we had as much information as possible. We had done our homework, and we could very carefully spend our time with the folks there, because everyone that we interfaced with had a day job. We had tremendous support from the on-site teams. Again, this is a big process. We typically had a team of 4 in each location, sometimes a team of 5. It's an architect working outside, an architect working inside, a mechanical plumbing fire protection engineer, an electrical safety communications engineer, and in this case, a climate resiliency specialist. Following that, we return to the office where we do our cost estimating, our reporting, our quality control, and then various versions of reporting. So we had the pilot reports, and then we had a report for each campus, both at the building level and at the campus level. We had those collaboration sessions to make sure that everyone had an understanding of why things were prioritized they were. We made sure that we included everything and that there was a voice for each campus inside of the reports before it was made part of the major system. So the way we do this field work is very structured. It is a lot of walking. We want to get into all of the spaces, and we also do a lot of talking. And the best case scenario is that we walk with field engineers that understand the systems, that are there on a full-time basis, because we're there for a limited time frame. We're not there in all of the weather conditions, the extreme heating, the extreme cooling scenarios. And in some cases, we're talking with folks that have 10, 20, 30, or in one case, 40 years of institutional knowledge at that campus. We want to be able to document and centralize that information for succession planning and high-level capital planning. The way that we did that in terms of collection was utilizing the software tool that we developed, FOSCore, to take this information in a consistent way and be able to manipulate the data, track, or report, prioritize, and cost estimate that data. Very importantly, I wanted to touch on the topic of cost estimating. The way that we do our work is through in-house cost estimators. We don't use regional or nationally available cost books. We make this information based on our design and construction experience in the state of Massachusetts, our Boston office doing a tremendous amount of work and throughout the New England region. Additionally, we source data through our job order contracting platform and then our deferred maintenance database. We're bringing costs in from 3 areas that have the best in-class on-site information. But what's really important is that even a small state like Massachusetts has tremendous regional difference. The cost of doing business in Boston or Cape Cod is very different than doing work in Western Massachusetts, Springfield, or any of the more rural parts of the state. So we had to really tailor those at the zip code level to make sure the cost reflected the cost of doing business at each location. Setting up the data markers was very important, being able to slice and dice the information and isolate a specific example. So in this case, we're talking about ADA deficiencies. We framed a very careful logic tree to be able to group ADA deficiencies into 3 groups, and essentially corresponded to the level of detail rather than a strict prioritization or urgency, because frankly, everything needs to be done. But this was about what was most accessible, no pun intended, in terms of speedy recovery and implementation. And the graph on the right shows us that we can see at each campus the deferred maintenance in contrast to the ADA deficiencies. So again, having clear categories, having clear prioritization and other ways to slice the data is important to test during the pilot to make sure that you can have these big picture conversations once your data is complete. So one specific example, and I think this speaks to what Sarah was talking about aligning deferred maintenance, resiliency, decarbonization in equipment. So because we were looking at various levels, at various types of information, we were able to say, all right, let's look at all of the decarbonization opportunities. Where are those? Of those, how many were fuel burning equipment? And then cross-reference that with the priority rubric that we had set up and tested during the pilot process, so that we could say, here are the priority 1 boilers across the entire Commonwealth. Here are the 2s, here are the 3s. To be able to cross-reference different data types to be able to generate projects going forward that are going to accomplish multiple goals and move the needle towards goals. So we were very lucky to be part of the climate resiliency assessment really at its genesis. We started with the Excel document and were able to work with the team as they developed the web-based tool over the course of the pilot. So from a granular standpoint, we're looking at places that have been affected by natural hazards, recognizing any environmental justice communities, requesting utility information, and looking at emergency power was another key. We also looked at risk categories and climate information and floodplain information. I think it's important to note that a portion of this work was done in the field through interviews, through observation, through data requests, but another portion of this work was about centralizing information. Next slide. That was already available. So in this risk case scenario, or this risk example, this is information that came from other databases, but our goal was to put everything together that we knew about each individual asset and then each individual campus so that everything was in one place from a decision-making standpoint. So we have the risk factors for sea level and storm surge, extreme precipitation, and extreme heat. We also had the mapping that was associated with each of these. Next slide. So this allowed us to see, again, out to 2050, out to 2070, what are the big picture struggles that we're going to have at these campuses, and how do we get out ahead of that using the data set that we developed specifically to make decisions in the state of Massachusetts. So now I'm getting into the real component level. I'm getting into the equipment verification. So one of the things that we did during this time was to look at the existing work order system, understand what was present, and then to do a field verification to make sure that equipment was either still in place, if it had been abandoned in place, if it had been replaced, and what it had been replaced with. This was additionally a unit looking at what is that fuel source. So again, this granular information was combined with more major information to facilitate decision making. And now from that equipment level, I'm going to zoom way out to all 24 campuses to say, here's what we had for the entire 10-year estimated construction costs for deferred maintenance. So we could see which campuses had the highest need, and then be able to break that down using the categories that we had established during the pilot. Next slide, please. So some of those big bars we start to break down, especially at campus 1, we see that that is a substantial need campus, but we can also say, well, what is the immediate need at each campus? So you can see the difference between campus 1, 5, and 10. Those look very different than looking at just the grand total. So again, defining the categories, defining how decisions will be made was very critical and was tested during the pilot phase. Another key example and useful example is breaking that down by discipline or trade. So to be able to say at a single campus, what of those priority 1 needs are architectural or mechanical or plumbing or safety, security, or structural. To be able to graph those and understand at the campus level and the building level, what are the needs by trade? This is useful both for project planning, capital improvement planning, but also hiring to understand, well, if we have a certain high need at a campus in a particular trade, maybe this is a place that we need to staff up in terms of existing on-site management personnel. And then I'm going to zoom back out and talk about the big picture estimated construction costs. And this is something that we tailored for Sarah and Mila and for their team, was to be able to report out. This is something we collaborated on, to have a final document that was really very accessible and tailored to big picture decision makers that would drill down into data as we go. And then of course we have the reports per campus, per asset, and the CAMUS integration of the data. Report, something that was very critical and that was integrated during the pilot process, was documenting the logic trees that we developed for prioritization and ADA work groups, as well as making sure that the terms that we were using from an industry standpoint matched or were replaced with the way that DCAM plans. So it was really about making sure that anyone who picked up one of these reports understood the way these decisions were framed, the purpose of each, and the meaning of each, so that these reports could stand alone and were presented in the language of DCAM and the higher education institutions in Massachusetts. And then critically is making sure all of the data that we collected lives on. So in this case, the Canvas work order system is the single source of truth for the Commonwealth across the state in terms of understanding every single aspect. So what we did during the pilot was make sure we understood every single piece that was collected, stored, and maintained. What are the pieces that we were adding? And then we tested that process throughout the pilot and then commenced across the entire Commonwealth system. What this is allowing the stakeholders at DCAM and other institutions to do is to maintain this data over time and make sure that the information and the investment grows in value. And then briefly, this is just one example of one system. There's tons of CMMS, computerized maintenance management systems, or IWMS, information work order systems, that we see across the country. Working in Excel is really the common language. Having those players up front during the pilot was critical to our success. And really, this is something that we do as a service to make sure that folks have the information, it's in the language that they need, and they can carry it forward.
And I just wanted, from the perspective of DCAM, this process has been hugely valuable to the Commonwealth because it clearly provides a comparable sort of common baseline data set that has buy-in from the institutions. And so when we make decisions, we are able to there are multiple data points, but it is one of the data points that allows us to have a conversation about why those decisions are being made. So the data sort of informs how we make our capital decisions across the state, both for deferred maintenance, for larger capital projects, for infrastructure, and for decarbonization efforts and funding. I think it's also important to note that in Massachusetts, unlike some states, our campuses are responsible for the care and control of their own assets. We provide some maintenance fundings, but they they prioritize and decide on what deferred maintenance to address, what needs to be done on the campus. And they're responsible really for maintaining the campus on a day-to-day basis. It is not, there is not a system-wide way of doing that. So for each individual campus, FOSS provided reports for every single building that had a page, every single deficiency, and really drilled into each building and also the campus as a whole to give them information by which they can make capital investment decisions with the money that they're allocated to address things like deferred maintenance. It also provides a valuable update to our CAMUS, as Nick calls it. That's actually the Commonwealth Asset Management Information System. Basically our database where we track building information. And it's not just the deferred maintenance that was uploaded to that system, it's also the equipment list. Because we don't have care and control of each of our campuses, we don't maintain an updated list of equipment, but that information is hugely valuable as we develop how to invest in decarbonization. And so this update of equipment and sort of confirmation of what we have and don't have on site is going to really serve us as we make decisions going forward, whether they're small decisions when we need to replace, when a campus needs to replace a boiler, or whether they're larger decisions you know, should we be addressing this campus or that central plant first or the other central plant first? How many buildings is that central plant serving? And also for all of our capital projects, it provides a base of information from which to start. It does not eliminate the need for existing conditions assessments or building specific facility condition assessments. This was fundamentally a visual assessment. It did not include any destructive testing or anything of that nature. So again, hugely valuable. I think the campus buy-in was a huge part of that. I think FOSS's teams having these experts on site was also incredibly valuable. Next slide. I think where's the end? So I guess I would start by saying, you know, identify what it is you're trying to achieve with your facility condition assessment, how you're trying to use the information, and, you know, put the sort of background in place that really allows that to happen. Engage the institutions or the campuses in that discussion. And then I would suggest to everyone that you walk through and read RFPs from other facility conditions assessments that may have been done in other states to understand how other states may or may not have approached this kind of work. And Nick,
Yeah, I'll go next. And I think, you know, as we set out to share in this webinar, we really wanted to think about if there's anyone else out there who's, you know, building a program this big, thinking about something that's integrated like this, you know, what can we put out into the world? What can we share? How can we help? So I think two things came up for me, and Sarah talked a little bit about the iterative RFI, RFP, Master Services Agreement. So when DCAM went out for the initial RFI, it was about collecting information, you know, seeing what the market is doing today, and really bringing qualified people to the table. More than that was giving all of the information up front. You know, sometimes we see RFPs and RFIs that say, you know, data will be provided to the selected vendor. For us, it was so valuable to have all of the information, the outputs from Camus, understanding the goals and understanding what each campus, you know, we had write-ups on each campus inside of that RFP. We were really off to the races from the very beginning, fully informed. And then secondarily, I wanted to restate the importance of the pilot assessment. Having those two community colleges, having those two state universities, bringing everyone to the table, ADA, climate resiliency, the folks at Camus that, you know, maintain that database, bringing everyone to those four campuses first, improving the process, testing the project process, refining our logic. That's what really set us up for success, and that would be my number one recommendation for anyone considering something like this.
And I would just add with that, you know, confirming what it is you're looking for, because I think we went through a lot of work with FOSS, and, you know, I can't say how good they were at sort of responding to us saying, we want this data shown a different way, or we need it shown a different way.
And I want to reiterate that all of this effort, we had the right partners, but it wouldn't have been possible without, you know, having the Massachusetts initiatives trying to meet all of our goals. And at the end of the day, we had so many team members and so many stakeholders that were involved in the process. So everything took a lot longer. So whatever you do, try to double your time of what you think it's going to take. It's really honest, and it's very direct advice. You know, we're very positive, and our stakeholders work really well with us, but it was a big project, huge undertaking, so it always takes a little longer than you expect.
And I think we did want to open it up. I don't don't know if there are any questions in the chat or if we want to open it up for some questions.
Yes, good afternoon. We do have quite a few questions in the chat box. So let's get started with our questions. The first question is, what information does the university need to provide to FOSS of Canon Design?
I can tell you what we provided, but Nick, I think that's more of a question for you.
Yeah, so I'll take a stab at that and then pass it back to Sarah. So at a campus level, if the question is, you know, pre-assessment, what do we ask for so that we're informed before we get in the field? The answer would be we would want to get electrical one-line drawings. We would want to get any past assessments that are reliability. We would ask for mechanical schedules. You know, we essentially received the mechanical schedule in the RFP, as well as past capital plans. So in terms of information from a campus before we do a field assessment, I think that would be the list, but I'm not sure if that was the question.
I believe it was, but if it wasn't, our person asking the question can let us know. Our next question is, how much work order history was available for components, and was it used to prioritize?
The work order history varied from campus to campus. And through the interview process and review of the work order history, that was something that was helpful in terms of saying, well, here's something that's been replaced at an above average frequency. When we do this work, we're typically looking at 3 different time frames. We're looking at what we call action time frame. When do we recommend this be done? Remaining useful life. How long could we let this slide? And then the BOMA value for reference only. Of course, BOMA being laboratory conditions for how something might last. So yes, work order history is useful. I think it's as useful as the interviews in persons and the tours. I think it all comes together. I don't think you can do it from any one aspect.
Okay, well, thank you. Our next question is there any requirement for the individual campuses to report on their status toward achieving their 20 for the reporting?
Yes, in the sense that when we have the current process that we have, which was put in place in FY19, is that we are allocated a total amount of funding, which we allocate to individual institutions. So the institutions have a 5-year amount of funding that they're required to spend, and they report quarterly on, they have to develop a 5-year plan on how they're going to use those funds. And then they have a quarterly report, which they have to provide in terms of using those funds. And from the perspective of a public institution, if state bond funding is being used to fund the projects, we at least have to have a procurement, a reporting from the institutions, because that money has to be spent in a certain time. So we track when that money is being spent, and if it's not being spent, we look at possibly reallocating it at a later date.
Okay, thank you for the answer. The next question is, how many buildings were in this report?
270, plus or minus.
Thank you. Our next question is, what rules or parameters did you use to figure out what level, single system record or component level record, an equipment or system should be captured?
That's a very good question. So
That is a good one. I'm feeling that one.
So generally speaking, the majority of the work is captured on a level 3 system record. The difference for a level 5 is when we have something that is discrete and that particular component is going to affect the performance of the entire system. That is when the point at which we would break that out What we have found as a best value is providing a level 3 assessment combined with a level 5 assessment. Largely this was level 3, but in many cases this paired level of detail helps you target what should be advanced for projects and what should be grouped as a system. I think another way to think about that might be it's when the action time frame for that component is so far ahead of the entire system. When you see a part or piece that is reaching failure faster than the rest of the parent group, is to isolate that and target it for replacement. So I think it really comes down to the when.
Okay, thank you. And we have a question about getting a copy of the presentation. We will have a copy of the presentation slides tomorrow, and it will be available to all educational institutions. And we've got one more question here in the chat. Does the document need to be living data? Was this provided to the client in an electronic format that can be integrated into this campus system? This would allow it to evolve over time and not end up being a static report.
So yes, it was provided to us in electronic format, and yes, we are uploading it electronically, digitally to our database. Having said that, any FCA is only as good as the time that you actually visit the site and do the assessment. And that's a challenge when you're looking at so many buildings. This FCA is serving to update information that was gathered in 2017. Did I get that right?
Yep.
So our previous FCA of this system of institutions was done in 2017. We have procurement laws, which in the state just make it very difficult for us to have a continual assessment, but I know that FOSS does that for many institutions. They're able to, do a annual or biannual or however you do it. Nick, you can speak to that better than I can.
I would add to that our team always delivers 2 ways. So the first way is that static report. What did we see when we were there? So that PDF record. And secondarily, the dynamic deliverable is always part of final turnover. So that may be in this case in Canvas or a different work order system. Sometimes it's in Excel. And most frequently, we provide it in FOSScore, which is the tool that we developed to keep data alive. We had a number of the campuses that opted in for other assets that were not part of the DCAM portfolio and are active users of that software platform. So our goal is always to, again, have the static, what did we see when we were there, and the dynamic, how do we keep this going? Because we want to limit the future investment and have people have current information for decision making. Dynamic is always the way to go. I've been in buildings that do 200 work orders a day. The only way to stay current is to have that dynamic tool.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next question is, do you need historical function?
I'm sorry, Billy, we lost you momentarily there. Could you repeat the question?
I am so sorry. Do you need historical building drawings to do this work?
So the answer is no. We get a range of information ranging from, we don't know anything about this building, and it's not specific to this portfolio, just generally in the industry. We'll have buildings that do not have documents. We'll have buildings that have some archival information. We'll have some buildings that will have some PDFs. We'll have partial sets of information. Sometimes all we get is an egress plan. And sometimes we have BIM drawings It really runs the gamut in terms of level of documentation, but we are set up to evaluate buildings regardless of documentation.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is rather long, so bear with me here. When calculating the net carbon reduction effort of the sustainable modifications, do the calculations for the carbon footprint of the replacement product include the full production carbon footprint from mining, transportation, power consumption for the actual fabrication and the source of power, transportation to market, and finally the legacy of the item at end of life disposal?
So I believe what you're talking about is what we call embodied carbon. I believe, and I'm not the expert on this because I'm not part of the energy team, and Mila, you may know more than I do, but I believe that the graphs we're looking at are purely from primarily use information, so not the embodied carbon, but it's a question we are dealing with as we speak and trying to incorporate into how we think about it. So my answer is not yet, we're working on it.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And that is all of the questions that we have in our chat box at the moment. So if I could take a moment, I'd like to thank our presenters today and to Foss of Canon Design for a very informative webinar today, and to our attendees, as always, thank you for taking time out of your extremely busy schedules to be with us today. So until next time, be safe, stay healthy, and let's be kind to one another. Thank you so much. Bye-bye now.